Good evening, and thanks for joining us for this digital exclusive discussion about the first in the South primary, the primary season here in South Carolina. We all know about the importance of this state when it comes to the election process on the road to the White House. And who better for the next 30 minutes or so to discuss this and some familiar faces that you've seen here in this studio. The men to my left, Antoine Seawright, such a great contributor to us over the years, Democratic strategist, and Joel Sawyer, Republican strategist, that we turn to so often during these political seasons. Let's start off with the hype over this. We are 2 days out from the Democratic primary. I mean, the winner is a foregone conclusion, no doubt about that. So the hype level does seem to be a little bit lower for this. But we checked into just the early voting returns so far for ballots that have been cast. And there was a lot of discussion about the importance of early voting. Like, it'll get people out, it'll reduce lines. Only about 30,000 so ballots, according to the South Carolina Election Commission so far. Of course, those numbers will change throughout the day, but we're not expecting them to spike. Let's talk about that so far. Are you disappointed to see low turnout so far before we get to Saturday?
You're always concerned when you see early vote numbers not where you ultimately want them to be as a strategist. However, there's some metrics to understand. We have an incumbent president running for re-election. It's almost unprecedented for an incumbent president, and from either party, to be challenged in a primary. So that's why I'm not overly worried. The good news is people know there's a primary. People know there will be participation. The even better news for the unity's sake of the Democratic Party is Joe Biden will likely end up victorious on Saturday, and I think we can continue to move forward. But I will caution anyone who does not think early vote matters, because that is something we should always expand opportunities to participate at the ballot box. In South Carolina, thankfully, the General Assembly came together in a bipartisan way, post-COVID or even during COVID, to make that happen. I think we have to demonstrate why that was an effective measure to make certain our voices are heard.
Yeah, it is an important move, for sure. First primary season where we're going to have that in effect, and first presidential election where we're going to have early voting in place.
It is, and obviously, one thing that Antoine and I are always on the same page about is vote, 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 make your voice heard. Now, it is difficult to motivate people when the outcome is known. I mean, Joe Biden is gonna run up the score, right? I mean, he's an incumbent president. I always thought it was a little bit of an odd decision to even have this primary, because look, it's if Joe Biden does not generate high voting numbers, high turnout numbers, if he does not just demolish anybody else who's on the ballot, it seems to me like a little bit of a high risk, low reward in terms of turning people out to vote, making sure that you're running up the score. And it's not unprecedented to cancel primaries. Look, in 2012, not 2012, in 2020, the Republican primary was canceled for Trump. Way back in 1996, the Democratic Party canceled its primary for Bill Clinton. So, the Democratic Party has embraced a little bit of a risky strategy here, and so they're certainly hoping people are going to turn out for this.
Absolutely, and you talk about the foregone conclusion of this, running up the score because you have an incumbent, but we were talking a little bit before we started, and it almost feels like on the GOP side of things, you also are dealing with that situation. Yes, Donald Trump is still facing the former governor of South Carolina, Nikki Haley, who is here today. Rallying ahead of the Republican primary, which is in 3 weeks from now. But the hype factor doesn't feel like it's there for that either. It's primary season here. Usually South Carolina feels like a blood sport. It doesn't right now.
It is. Look, you're down to two candidates, and I think on some level people kind of think it's a far-gone conclusion. What's interesting is Trump is effectively an incumbent, even though he's not in office right now. And he hasn't really pushed past 60% in any of the polling or any of the results yet. So, that's another thing is where you have kind of alarm bells, red flags on the Democratic side about just the number of people who are turning out. Does 60% showing after showing after showing pretend alarm bells for Donald Trump? I think that we will see, once media buys start happening, for the past week or so, Nikki Haley's been in fundraising mode, right? She hasn't really been in campaigning mode, and you have to get those dollars to really leverage your time with TV ads, digital ads, and so on and so forth. So I think that we will see an uptick in buzz and just campaign activities with the Republican Party very soon.
And what the former governor is doing is, I think, is preserving resources. You have Americans for Prosperity, AFP, who's spending somewhere north of $3.7 million on her behalf, even targeting Democrats, saying to them, if you really want to stop Trump, vote in the Republican primary against Trump, because the foregone conclusion is Joe Biden will be victorious. And so there's a real effort on her behalf where she's playing away from the ball. But the other thing I see happening within the Republican ecosystem right now is people are suffering from political exhaustion.
Yeah.
You see political PTSD for some, and then you see political ADHD, where they just can't pay attention enough long enough because everybody's so frustrated. There's very little oxygen to inhale, and whether the chattering class wants to come to grips with it or not, is that every time you see the former president in court or saying something on Truth Social, he is campaigning without putting up one single TV ad. And so his name ID and him running against the system, tapping into this anger out there, is being demonstrated in the results. In Iowa, New Hampshire, I think we'll see that in Nevada, and then eventually in South Carolina.
You mentioned fatigue, exhaustion. It appears that we'll be heading for a rematch of 2020. We certainly don't want to say it's a foregone conclusion, but it appears that's what we're heading for. Do either of you worry that there will be voter fatigue by the time we get to November? I know presidential elections always get people going, but
it is, and this is going to be a turnout election. Because the universe of people who voted for Biden last time that could be persuaded to vote for Trump this time, or vice versa, Trump last time, Biden this time, that's an exceedingly small number of people. So what you're going to see both campaigns do is try to turn out their base, and quite honestly, with negative campaigning, drive down the turnout for people who might be voting for the other person. So I think that you are going to see overall voter turnout for the presidential race considerably lower than what you saw in 2020.
The other dynamic we have to consider in this presidential race, in November, is that we'll have a number of third-party candidates participating. And I think that's going to zap votes and energy from both sides.
Yeah.
And so I think you'll see traditional turnout, Democrat and Republican, suffocated a bit. But I do think once we get into the political window or political season a little deeper, and both candidates try to define the other side, both the brand and the candidate, I think you'll see the engagement kind of ramp itself up strategically. I also think that the dynamic of the former president having some court legal issues to deal with will be unprecedented for a presidential cycle in my lifetime, and I think that's going to have some real impact.
In all of our lifetimes, without a doubt. We've seen a lot of the Democrats here in the last couple of weeks. We had the VP spoke at King Day at the Dome, at the rally there, keynote speaker, made a couple other appearances around town. She'll be here tomorrow as well to get out the vote rally at SC State. Another person that you always see, though, the political kingmaker in South Carolina, Congressman Jim Clyburn. We've seen a lot of him. Our friend Clairvaux was able to speak with him before we got together to have this discussion, and I want us to take a listen to what the senior statesman of South Carolina has to say about this election.
Brian, with South Carolina's historic Democratic primary just days away, we wanted to hear from the man who President Biden says is the reason he's in the White House, and that man is none other than South Carolina Congressman Jim Clyburn. I talked with the congressman in length about former President Donald Trump, Nikki Haley, and President Biden's second run for the Oval Office.
Every election's got consequences.
South Carolina Congressman Jim Clyburn making it plain that voters who lean Democratic should not stay home this Saturday. Right now, it's looking likely that the November election will be between President Biden and former President Donald Trump. One issue that keeps coming up is how old the frontrunners are. Clyburn says it's a non-issue.
I've often said that all things are relative, and age is a very relative thing. I'm 2 years older than Biden.
So far, all the Republicans hoping to get the GOP nomination have dropped out of the race, except former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley. Clyburn says the Republican Party needs to make a switch, and he's all in for a Biden-Haley matchup.
What has happened to the Republican Party it's now been turned into a cult by Trump. So if there were to shed themselves of Trump and nominate Nikki Haley. It would call for a better discussion of issues and competing visions going forward. I would love to see that happen.
Clyburn says some Americans are happy with Biden's accomplishments.
What they tell me, I love what Joe Biden has done. I love the fact he's eliminated $137 billion in student loan debt. I love the fact that he is building, paying out roads and bridges that have been in disrepair for decades. I love the fact that he's putting broadband in every home.
Clyburn says he can't believe Trump continues to make a run for the White House, even with 91 indictments against him. Clyburn says those indictments are fuel for his supporters.
Because he thinks if he gets to be president, he can get rid of those 91 indictments. That's the only way he's going to get rid of them. And so his supporters who wish that to occur are going to be for him.
Clyburn says throughout the campaign trail, many Americans are saying they don't want Trump or Biden, so they're not going to vote. Clyburn says that is the wrong mentality to have.
So I'm going to sit home and run the risk of letting that guy who I know is a crook, who I know has been determined by a court of law to be a rapist. I know that. But I think I'd rather have that for my children and grandchildren to look forward to than the man who has been nothing but the epitome of what you want a president to be.
Clyburn tells voters they need to choose the right candidate for the sake of democracy.
In 4 years, you'll get something different. But in this year, it's going to be one or the other. You can stay home and let it be the other. Because I say to people all the time, Reconstruction came to an end by one vote.
And as I mentioned before, we often hear President Biden say if he's in the White House, it's because of Congressman Clyburn. Now, during the interview, I talked to the congressman about that, and he told me he told President Biden to stop saying that. Instead, Clyburn wants the praise to go to the people of South Carolina. Brian?
Good stuff there from Friendy and Congressman Clyburn, and there is a whole lot of meat on that bone.
Yes.
We talked about some of the things that were mentioned there, but then you hear it from the man that gets the praise for springboarding the Biden campaign in 2020 when he came here to South Carolina. We were talking about it before we went to that interview about the just stay-at-home factor. We don't ever want people to just stay at home during an election cycle, regardless of your political stripes. Never.
Yeah, make your voice heard one way or the other. If you can't vote for Trump or Biden, vote for a third party. But just, you know, the reason we end up with so many political figures and people in office who are not responsive to what citizens want is because they know they can get away with it. You know, they know that 19% of people are going to vote in any given primary. They know that 50% of people are going to vote in, you know, any given election. And when you literally don't have to listen to half the people who aren't voting, you're going to keep getting what you're getting.
Look, there are bad politicians in office because good people stay at home. And if you're pissed off with the system, frustrated, mad, angry, however you describe it, the only way you fix that is by participating. And if you're black, and if you have the same life experiences that I've had, it's been a very short window of time in this country where we've had the ability to freely participate in any election without having to count how many marbles are in a jar, recite words on a piece of paper that's sometimes written wrong, count how many bubbles are in a piece of bubble gum. And so we have to enjoy those things because at the same time and in the same token, when we don't show up, people who want to take away those rights are working overtime to erode those fundamental freedoms we recently enjoyed. And in that case, in South Carolina, you choose what primary to participate in. In this case, it's important to vote for Joe Biden if you are for Joe Biden, not necessarily against Donald Trump in the Republican primary.
Congressman Clyburn, older than both of the candidates, or all of the candidates, let's say, because we still have Nikki Haley in the race as well. How significant does age have to be? We hear people talk about it each and every day. You see snippets that sometimes are taken out of context on social media about a gaffe by the president. How significant is this for not only the incumbent, but Mr. Trump? Because if he were to win, would be into his 80s by the end of the term.
Sure, and look, I always say that any issues in politics matter as much as the dollars spent to make it matter, right? So if you have a $5 million ad buy going up highlighting age, it's going to matter more than it currently does, right? So look, I think that obviously the Trump team has been leaning into Biden's age and Biden's gaffes for a long time. What you've started to see more recently is that the Biden team leaning into pointing out Trump's gaffes. You've seen the Haley team lean into pointing out Trump's gaffes. Look, both these guys are in their 80s. They are going to, like, as you age, you lose a step. You're going to mix things up, particularly when you're in a stressful situation and you're talking in front of people over and over and over again. So I think that you're going to see both campaigns highlight that and try to make it matter to voters.
Look, I don't talk about people being old, especially our president. I talk about his experience, because with age comes wisdom and experience. And I'd much rather have an 80-plus-year-old Joe Biden versus a 70-plus-year-old former President Donald Trump, or a 50, 40-year-old Nikki Haley or anyone else, because of the times we're living through. And it's ironic when you hear conversations about President Biden's age, you don't hear much about the contrast to former President Trump's age. And I jokingly said to a friend of mine on the Republican side, even with Joe Biden's age, it does not add up to the number of indictments by the former president. And so if you look at what this president has done at his age and what he's accomplished, more successful on how we measure presidents than any other president, arguably, in American history. So I'd much rather have that than what we've seen from the former president in his 4 years in office.
But in the case that Antoine just made is the case that Democrats are going to try to make this fall. I mean, the flip side of that is, people who watch the news, people who are, high volume news consumers, have seen Joe Biden lead the stage the wrong way and look a little bit off, have seen him mix things up and when he's talking and look a little bit off. That kind of thing is like, you can't have people unsee that, right? But at the same time, I mean, people are going to come down to a choice, right? And it was like, how much does this actually matter versus, there are going to be a lot of people, one way or the other, holding their nose and voting in this election.
Yeah. You heard the congressman make a point there that maybe not everyone talks about much, is the possibility of a Haley-Biden showdown.
Right.
It's a possibility.
Sure.
It is not off the table quite yet. We have heard people sit in this studio in recent months on our good friend Cynthia Hardy's show, On Point, have talked about it doesn't matter who the Republicans run, out of all this pool, whoever it is, they'll beat Joe Biden. Is that true? Is that true? From where you're sitting, I'm sure you say no way.
Look, regardless of who the person is or who the nominee is, the same things apply. Trumpism. And that is what the Republican Party has now clothed themselves into. And most of the candidates, with the exception of a few who ran in the Republican preference primary, tried to run away from Trump, but embrace Trumpism. And what voters have declared is that why replicate or why get a duplication when we can have the real thing? So even in some wild, off-the-earth scenario that the former governor is the nominee, or anyone else for that matter, I still think the principles are the same for Democrats. We have to define them on the extremism that come with any candidate who comes out of the Republican Party, because you cannot win the nomination and you cannot be the winner in a general election without having Trumpers support you or Trumpism wrap yourself around you.
Yeah. I think that, with all due respect to Antoine, I think that Democrats would much rather face Trump than Nikki Haley, because Nikki Haley is largely undefined to a broad swath of the country. I think that there are certain things that she can point back to moderate herself a little bit and make herself more appealing to moderate voters. To some degree, to steal this slightly from Antoine, is that Nikki Haley's kind of setting herself up for the 2028, we try to tell y'all election. Whereas if, politically, the best thing to happen to her would be if Trump were to win and to lose to Biden, because that sets her up perfectly for 2028. She's out there making an electability argument right now. And Republican primary voters largely are not listening to that.
And she will be here. And interestingly today, too, this morning, Team Trump, South Carolina, calling a news conference at the State House today with a lot of people that served with the former governor, Nikki Haley, Alan Wilson, Curtis Loftus, many other folks that served in the legislature with her as well were there. Not only taking shots at her and firmly rallying behind Donald Trump, but also the president, President Biden. They were attacking border policies for the most part. We want to take a quick listen to what Alan Wilson had to say about that today, where he was essentially saying that the only person to solve the issues at the southern border is Donald Trump, not President Biden or Nikki Haley. If we just take a listen.
Everyone up here supporting President Trump is here for various reasons. But most importantly, all of us are very concerned about the crisis at the southern border. We all recognize that what is happening on America's southern borders is ending up here in South Carolina's doorstep. The trickle-down effects are devastating and catastrophic to our economy. It threatens our public safety, and most importantly, it's destroying lives.
This debate over the border has been going on almost ever since President Biden took office, for sure. Amped up for sure. How significant is this to the Palmetto State voters? Number one, in Saturday's primary or the 24th?
Well, let's start with, we do have an issue at the border.
Yes.
And that border issue was there before Joe Biden was the president. It was there during Bush 1. It was there during Bush 2.
But it's
everybody.
It's at a place where it has never been before.
Sure. Well, most things, when you don't deal with them in a real way, just like a leaky roof, will get worse over time.
Yeah, fair enough.
So Joe Biden is not the cause of the border problem. Now, does it have the impact on South Carolina, as the AG, with all due respect, laid out? Look, I think the only border issue we have maybe here in the Midlands is the number of people moving from Lexington County to Richland County, or Richland County to Lexington County. At the end of the day, this President Biden, has said he's willing to work with Republicans to do something about border security and dealing with the border in a real way. He said that. He's welcomed Republicans to the conversation, put forth the first legislation that he put forth was a comprehensive immigration bill. There was bipartisan agreement to go along with getting this done. Along comes the former president, the leader of the Republican Party, throws a poison pill into it, and now you have this scatterbrain effort everywhere that no one wants to do anything because the former president wants to make this a campaign red meat issue for the sake of rallying his base. Because if you ask most Republicans who align themselves with Trump, they would say Trump was going to deal with the border by building a wall, Mexico paying for it, and that was going to solve all of our border issues when he was president.
Which didn't happen. But,
right. No,
I mean, look. I mean, I would say one thing is that there were several different executive orders that Trump had put in place, that Biden repealed when he came into office, dealing with the border and dealing with policies for dealing with immigrants when they came in. I will say that the border crisis has certainly been exacerbated under Biden. Now, how much of that stuff could he fix administratively via executive order? I think it could help. Ultimately, I do agree that we are going to need some sort of border bill, and it is to Trump's benefit to delay that until he comes into office. It'll be interesting to see. That's the border is something that very, very much resonates with Republican primary voters, with Republicans. How much will that resonate with swing voters, and to what degree are there even going to be true swing voters in this election? Time will tell, but I suspect it's not much.
But I also think there's a realistic piece we have to pull out of this puzzle, and that's that immigrants contribute to the American ecosystem.
Sure,
they play a role.
Yeah.
And so there's not this idea that all these people are bad, all these things exist, that's the red meat that's being thrown out. They play a pivotal role. They contribute to our GDP, our economy. They're doing jobs that most people in this country have decided
They don't
not
wanna
to
do.
do or whatever. So they play a role. So I think we have to have some sort of system in place that will limit how they come into this country and how they operate when they're here. And I think that's where the rubber has to meet the road. And that's where boys and girls on both sides have to come together.
Yeah, it has to happen sooner as opposed to later. When you see all those people, by the way, I just want to ask this question. You see all those people standing on the State House steps, essentially former cronies of the governor.
Sure.
Not anymore. She was tapped as a UN ambassador by President Trump, and now they're all at odds, going after their old friend.
Yeah.
What do you make of that?
I
Either of
think
you?
that an old colleague.
Well, okay, old colleague.
Nikki Haley has always had a very, very tight circle of people who are truly in the tent with her. So, it's no surprise to me that people who may have been colleagues but not necessarily friends are aligning themselves with President Trump. The ones that are somewhat surprising, and look, I think to Trump's, whether you want to say it to his credit or not, but I think he's sent a very clear message to political figures across the country is that there is no neutrality. It's a two-person race, and if you're not with me, you're against me. And so that's why we see people like Tim Scott, who Nikki Haley literally waved a wand and put into the Senate. We see Nancy Mace, who was in a primary versus Katie Arrington. Trump was on Team Arrington, and Nikki Haley came down and was on Team Mace. Helped her get over the finish line in her primary. People like that, who she really has tried to help rather than just serve with. Going against her in this high-profile way, I think is going to make her shrink that tent even tighter.
But politics is a game of addition and multiplication, not subtraction or division. I think it's no secret where the Republican Party has shifted, and they shifted themselves towards Trumpism. So I think Haley understands that. She's trying to be an outlier, but to the degree that she feels bothered by people standing against her, she should be reminded when she was governor how she primaried a lot of those folks for her own benefit and how she was a political bully as the governor of this state. And so for a lot of that, it's payback time for a lot of people. And then the other thing is Nikki Haley, win or lose, is a forgotten conclusion or is a forgotten figure amongst a lot of people. So there's no political benefit to Haley in the way she's campaigning, but there is long-term political benefit for Trumpism, because that is the order of the day in the Republican Party, and I politically do not see the party shifting backwards.
Yeah. Got about 2.5 minutes or so left before we wrap up our discussion. We could go for probably the next 4 hours if we really wanted to. But the bottom line always has been for generations now, South Carolina picks presidents. The primary means so much here. So final word from each of you as we head into Saturday's vote. And don't forget, if you want to do early voting, you still do so till the close of business tomorrow at your county election office if you don't want to go on Saturday. Final word from each of you just on as we head into Saturday and again, the first in the South Republican on the 24th.
Vote. I mean, we keep it very simple. Make your voice heard. I think that the Democratic, the result of the Democratic primary is pretty much a foregone conclusion. The Republican primary probably is too. But look, if you like or don't like, the direction that these parties are headed with their candidates, go make your voice heard. You can vote in one or the other. You just can't vote in both, but you can vote in either.
For Democrats, it was because of Joe Biden, who had the steel spine and the political will to make South Carolina first in the nation, because he wanted a diverse group of people, a diverse state, to be heard and seen first in the nation. That process is renewed every 4 years. Do not disappoint the country, who's often looking to us for political guidance in the primary season, and certainly do not make this president look bad or have remorse for making certain that black voices, predominantly who make up the Democratic primary, are heard first in this process.
And over the next few weeks, next few months, all we can say to the folks watching right now is put on the seatbelts, because they're going to see the ads, they're going to see the people shaking hands in person in this state.
But Brian, I'll also say, be careful where you get your information.
Sure,
This
that's
is
a good point. That's a good point.
This is a credible news outlet and a credible way to receive your information. But over the next couple of weeks and months, there will be a lot of news things that show up in your news feed and on your screen that are sincerely not true. And we have to be very careful about misinformation, disinformation in this political environment, along with artificial intelligence.
Yeah. If you click on a link or see a meme that 100% confirms everything you believed,
Probably not.
Yeah, maybe if too good to be true, probably is. So yeah, double check all your sources.
Man, always such a good conversation to have with you guys.
Thank you.
I wish we could stay here all day, but we got things to do.
That's right.
And you who are watching, you got to vote.
Yes.
We got this critical season here as we move ahead. Again, thank you to Antoine Seawright. Thank you to Joel Sawyer for always providing what is wonderful perspective. Thank you for watching this First in the South Democratic Primary Special.